Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jane Harman, the new, lucky me, Director, President, and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Succeeding Lee Hamilton is a huge honor. Leaving Congress after 9 terms was tough, but boy, was it worth it. This is a fantastic and wonderful opportunity for me, and I hope for the center as we put on events like this. It is an honor for us, for AfriCare and for the Constituency for Africa, to host Assistant Secretary Carson's address here today. No one has missed the turmoil in Northern Africa. But while international attention is focused on the Middle East and the Mediterranean region, the entire African continent enjoys its fair share of challenges, including failed states wrecked by conflict and threatened by piracy and terrorism, subjects I spent a lot of time on while I was a member of the United States Congress. The continent also struggles against autocratic governments, unfulfilled democratic transitions, and people yearning for basic freedoms. It is timely that Ambassador Carson, who has spent decades studying the cultures, history, and people of this continent, is here to share his insights with us today. Beginning as a Peace Corps volunteer in the early 60s in Tanzania to his time as ambassador in Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Uganda, Assistant Secretary Carson's interests overlap those of the Woodrow Wilson Center, named for our first internationalist president. I want to welcome several members of the diplomatic corps from Africa who are here today. Ambassador Steve Matenje from Malawi. Where are you, sir? Are you here? Nope. Not right yet. Ambassador Faida Maitufo from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Here she is. Ambassador Angel Niyohire from Burundi. Nope. And Ambassador Josefina Petra Diakite from Angola. You and your colleagues are always welcome at the center. It's also a pleasure to see an old friend. That's not that old, but he is an old friend. Don McHenry of Georgetown in the audience. He and I worked pretty closely in the Carter administration in another century, before half of you were born, but never mind. And I believe that former Congressman Al Wynn is expected, and I just want to give a shout out to him. He and I worked very closely in the United States Congress, and I hope he comes before too long to this meeting. No one is better placed than Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, Ambassador Johnnie Carson, to analyze for us the current state of play in Africa and how the African Union is responding to current events to its north and within the continent itself. And now Steve McDonald, who directs our Africa program and is a longtime friend of Ambassador Carson, will introduce him. Steve will also moderate the discussion, and I think that will include Q&A from the audience. So think of your hard questions right now. But again, it's my pleasure to welcome everyone here and to see my friend, whom I just had lunch with, from Italy, and to tell you that a collaboration is ongoing with former Prime Minister Prodi in terms of a big conference soon. So maybe I wasn't supposed to say that, but I'll sit down now after introducing Steve McDonald.
Thank you, Jane. This is a double pleasure for me because it is the first opportunity I've had to work with my new president in a formal public role like this, and it's delightful to see how well she interacts with the crowd and how many people she knows. I didn't realize your web is cast so wide in the African affairs community as well. But it's also good to be able to let my boss do all the work. So I just get the great pleasure here of introducing Johnnie. It's a pleasure I requested, I must say, not just because of a lifelong friendship. We came into the Foreign Service about the same time, served in posts adjacent to each other. Our families have been intertwined for many years. But as Jane Harman just said, at this time of great challenge and at this time of rapid change, in the very concepts and frameworks of the Africa that we think we know, it is encouraging to know that the stewardship of our policy on Africa is in the hands of such an experienced and competent professional. Ambassador Carson, we'll say no more about him because you have his full bio in front of you. He will speak for about 30 to 35 minutes. And then we will have a question and answer session for about another 45 minutes. That, of course, is our protocol here to be sure that we have plenty of time for interchange with the audience. And I know we have an overflow room, too, so those of you who are watching from the outside, we will be accepting questions from you. Just one more detail to add in terms of announcements, and that is Jane made reference to our co-sponsors here, Constituency for Africa and AfriCare, but I want to recognize the representatives here. We have Darius Mans from the President and CEO of AfriCare, and Robin Sanders, who's their outreach director, still Foreign Service officer, but working with him for this year, and Stanley, chairman of the board, and then we have Mel Foote, who's the founder and director of Constituency for Africa. So thank you very much, and with no further ado, let me have Ambassador Carson come to the podium.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I would like to, first of all, thank President Jane Harman and the Woodrow Wilson Center for inviting me to speak this afternoon. I'd also like to take this public opportunity to congratulate President Harman on her assumption of her new roles and responsibilities here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Certainly I and my colleagues wish you all great success at this fine institution. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge Steve McDonald, a friend and partner for many, many years. And it's a pleasure also to see numerous friends and colleagues in the audience. Ambassador Don McHenry, Ambassador Robin Sanders, Ambassador Howard Jeter, our ambassadorial colleagues from Africa, colleagues from past experiences in the Africa Front Office, Whitney Seidman, and it's also a good opportunity to reach out and acknowledge the presence of Darius Mann and also Mel Foote and his colleagues from the Constituency for Africa. All of you constitute, and I underscore, all of you constitute an important constituency for our policies in Africa. And I hope that this conversation, dialogue today, will be useful to all of you and the members of your various organizations, whether they are academic, think tank, or constituency groups. My original goal for today's talk was to provide you with a broad overview of the major issues and policies that we anticipate for the coming year. Before I do that, however, I would like to first draw your attention to two situations of grave and immediate concern to the United States. The first has largely been eclipsed by developments in places such as Japan, North Africa, and the Middle East. It is not making big headlines or receiving much coverage on the national news networks. Nonetheless, it is something on which we should all be focused. I'm talking about the elections in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the two most important countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and what happens in Nigeria has consequences not only for Africa, but for the United States and the entire global community. This past weekend, Nigeria was to have held the first of a series of elections that will shape the direction of Africa's most populous and second largest economy. Nigeria has not had credible national elections since 1993, and overcoming this negative legacy remains a significant challenge. This challenge was manifest on Saturday, April 2, as Nigeria's independent electoral body, INEC, intervened a few hours into the polling process to postpone the first round of voting for the National Assembly. The postponement was due to a variety of logistical problems, notably the failure to deliver voting materials to numerous polling places across the country. We share the disappointment of INEC and the Nigerian people that this important electoral event had to be postponed, and we renew our call for creditable and transparent elections in this critically important African country. As many of you know, the last elections in 2007 were deeply flawed and in no way reflected the ability and the capacity of the Nigerian people to organize and run successful elections. They were also a major embarrassment to many Nigerians as well. Rigging and theft of ballot boxes took place in full view of the public. Violence was rampant, and actual voting did not occur in many places. The results announced by the Electoral Commission had no basis in reality. Most Nigerian and international observers agreed that the 2007 elections represented a major setback for democracy, not only in Nigeria, but across Africa. Although the former election commissioner, Mr. Maurice Iwu, has gone, to this day, nobody has been held accountable for the fraud and mismanagement in the running of those elections. The appointment this last June of Professor Atahiri Jega as National Election Commissioner raised expectations that this year's elections would meet minimum standards of credibility. Dr. Jega is a respected university administrator, a professor, and civil activist who has brought much-needed integrity and competence to the position of election commissioner. He has inspired many Nigerians to become far more active and involved in the electoral process and to insist on greater transparency to combat fraud. Dr. Jega has also given international observers greater access to the Electoral Commission, and he has been open to the advice of international election experts from Africa, Latin America, and the United States. However, as we have seen this past weekend, one man alone cannot overcome significant systemic and logistical challenges, nor can one person alone turn around and transform a political culture in which stolen elections have become the norm for decades. The logistical challenges and inevitable confusion associated with the administration of elections in a country of Nigeria's size and population, not to mention its poor infrastructure, also create opportunities for political manipulation. And some politicians have acted in ways to make proper electoral oversight all the more difficult. Although the level of violence associated with the 2011 elections is down from what we witnessed in 2007, any election violence is unacceptable, and it casts a dark shadow over the entire electoral process. Assassination of candidates, bombings, riots, stoning of motorcades, and other forms of political hooliganism are to be condemned. The spoilers must not be allowed to prevail. Despite the poor start this past weekend, we encourage all Nigerians to exercise their rights as citizens to vote and to have their votes counted openly and transparently. Reports of a significant and peaceful turnout of Nigerian voters last Saturday are a positive indication of their democratic aspirations. We continue to support fully Dr. Jega and other like-minded election officials in their efforts to achieve better election results. But we are also monitoring the political environment very closely. Democracy is important to the people of Nigeria as it is important to the people of the United States. And we intend to take appropriate measures against those individuals who violate basic democratic norms, as we have done in such places as the Ivory Coast, Zimbabwe, and Madagascar. Our government will not turn a blind eye to a repeat of the political violence and wholesale electoral theft that took place in 2007. If Nigeria's current elections are not a significant improvement over the 2007 elections, and if the current elections do not meet the expectations of a majority of Nigeria's people, Nigeria and Nigeria's citizens will lose confidence in their leaders, their democratic institutions, and their capacity of the country to sustain a democratic trajectory in the future. We believe Nigeria has an historic opportunity to allow the Nigerian people the opportunity to elect their local, state, and national representatives in a climate free of violence and intimidation. We hope that opportunity will not be lost over the next 3 weeks of elections. The second situation of great concern to the United States is the current crisis in the Ivory Coast. For the past 4 months, the African Union, ECOWAS, and the United Nations have been calling upon Laurent Gbagbo to accept the choice of the Ivorian voters and to hand power over to Alassane Ouattara, the winner of last November's presidential elections. Accredited Ivorian and international observers assessed the first and the second rounds of those elections to be free, fair, and creditable. The UN Special Representative of the Secretary General conducted a separate and thorough analysis of over 20,000 tally sheets from all of the polling stations and supported the finding of the Côte d'Ivoire's own independent electoral commission that Alassane Ouattara had won the second round of voting with 54% of the votes cast. However, the Ivorian Constitutional Council nullified the results from several northern polling districts to eliminate Ouattara's margin of victory. The council did so without any regard for transparency and explanation of the complaints that were used to justify the nullification. Having lost the elections but unwilling to relinquish power, Gbagbo is now betting that the current chaos, violence, and humanitarian crisis will cow the African Union and the international community into backing down and accepting a settlement. Gbagbo's intransigence has exacerbated tensions and provoked violence across the country. He and his ministers have openly threatened the United Nations operation, which is charged with protecting civilians who are caught in the crossfire. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced, and violence last week probably has pushed the death toll in the Ivory Coast to above 1,000 people. Gbagbo's attempt to cling to power regardless of the high cost to millions of Ivorian citizens, regional stability, and to Africa's reputation is a direct insult to the many millions of Africans who have worked so hard in recent years to promote economic development, democratic reform, and political stability. The situation in the Côte d'Ivoire is frequently compared to that of Libya in terms of the international community's response and responsibilities to protect innocent civilians. That notion is simply wrong. For the past 4 months, the United States has been working closely with its African and other international partners to achieve a peaceful outcome to the Ivorian crisis. A robust international peacekeeping force has been on the ground since 2002, beginning first as an ECOWAS operation and then converting in 2004 to a UN-led effort. The peacekeepers prevented what many analysts believe could have turned into another prolonged, bloody civil war that had occurred in places like Sierra Leone and Liberia. Over the past 4 months, the peacekeepers have helped deter and contain violence while ECOWAS and the African Union tried to achieve a diplomatic solution to the latest crisis. French forces have also played a key role in preventing Côte d'Ivoire's civil war from escalating over the past decade, and as we see this week, are taking action with United Nations forces to take out Gbagbo's heavy weaponry and thereby reduce the risk to the civilian populations in Abidjan. I think these actions demonstrate the ability of the United Nations and the French to adapt to changing circumstances in what has become a very highly volatile and unpredictable situation. Without the presence of these peacekeepers, there is absolutely no doubt that the situation in Côte d'Ivoire would be far worse than it is now. Overall, the international community's response in Côte d'Ivoire thus far has been appropriately matched to the political and military circumstances on the ground. Gbagbo has virtually no airborne military assets, and UNOSI, with French assistance, has been able to neutralize Gbagbo's heavy military weaponry, a very different picture than we see in Libya. We should nonetheless be humble about what can be expected of external interventions in general. We are in regular contact with President Ouattara and with Prime Minister Soro to insist that forces claiming to fight on their behalf refrain from violence against civilians, looting, and other excesses. We are heartened by President Ouattara and Prime Minister Soro's clear directives to their forces to maintain the utmost respect for civilian populations, and their calls for transparent international investigations of all reported human rights abuses. We have also raised our concerns about violence committed by the pro-Gbagbo forces that have occurred and alleged in various parts of the Ivory Coast. We have made it clear that actors on all sides will be held accountable for war crimes and other atrocities. In the remainder of my remarks this afternoon, I will provide a brief overlook for the coming months and an overview of some of the specific policy priorities ahead. I'm happy to spend a good deal of time answering your questions afterwards, but am also very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts and comments as well. Some of you might already be familiar with the 5 focal points of our Africa policy: strengthening democracy and governance, helping to mitigate conflicts and crises, promoting economic growth and development, assisting Africa to deal with its health challenges, and working with Africans as partners to deal with a variety of new and old transnational issues. Over the past 2 years, Africa has made gains in some of these areas, has maintained the status quo in others, and has experienced setbacks in some. The recent referendum in southern Sudan was a great achievement for that country and also for Africa as well. Over a year ago, the comprehensive peace agreement appeared at risk of unraveling. In response, we stepped up our diplomatic engagement and increased our human and material resources. Our international partners, particularly the United Nations and the African Union, led the negotiations and referendum mechanics. But our interventions at critical moments helped to sustain the progress and the momentum. It is one of the greater of our achievements of the last 2 years in terms of our diplomatic effort and contribution to the success of the referendum. Smaller scale but equally intensive diplomatic efforts in collaboration with ECOWAS, our European partners, and the Guinean leaders helped divert the outbreak of a major conflict in Guinea-Conakry and steered that country through a transition that led to credible elections last year, and the first democratic government in that country in over 50 years. Likewise, our collaboration with ECOWAS facilitated the eventual transition back to democratically elected rule in Niger. I wish that I could include Zimbabwe, Madagascar on the list of countries that made progress this last year, but clearly the situation in both of those countries remains paralyzed as their leaders continue to try to manipulate the democratic process in their favor. Increasing political repression and economic stagnation in Eritrea has put that country on a par with North Korea. Over the next year, we will continue to work in close collaboration with our African and other international partners to address the many challenges ahead while capitalizing on the great opportunities that already exist in Africa. The most historic event for sub-Saharan Africa this year is likely to be the emergence of southern Sudan as an independent nation on July 9, 2011. The referendum was only one component of a still incomplete process. The North and the South must still negotiate and implement a wide range of agreements, and South Sudan must begin building the foundations for a stable government and a growing economy. The United States has already committed hundreds of millions of dollars to the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement, and we must remain engaged in the coming months and years to ensure that a southern Sudan becomes a successful and viable state. The 17 national elections scheduled for this year across Africa are also noteworthy. Although there's more to democracy than just elections, they do deserve to be seen as an important barometer of overall governance, and we must remain proactive in encouraging their success. The election scheduled to take place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in November will be critical for consolidating the still fragile peace and building public confidence in that government. The Congolese people and the international community are increasingly concerned with the government's performance in areas such as the rule of law, corruption, human rights, and in security sector reform. Tough and unresolved conflicts in Darfur, Somalia, and the eastern DRC are likely to remain among our greatest preoccupations over the next year as well. We recently appointed a senior diplomat, Ambassador Dane Smith, to intensify our efforts on resolving the Darfur conflict. And Ambassador Princeton Lyman was named just last week as the President's special envoy, replacing Scott Gratian, working exclusively on the Sudan issue. We are seeing signs of some progress in the Doha peace process on Darfur, and we urge the parties to continue to negotiate there in good faith. We are also encouraging the armed movements that are not participating in the Doha peace process to send delegations to Doha and to try to resolve this problem. The prospect of normalized relations between Khartoum and the United States, as laid out in the roadmap presented by Senator John Kerry to the Northern Sudanese leadership several months ago, also provides a new context in which to establish a constructive diplomatic relationship between Washington and Khartoum. Regarding Somalia, last year we rolled out a revised approach to this 20-year-old crisis. We call it a dual-track strategy because it provides for continuing support for the TFG, the Transitional Federal Government, and also recognizes the potential role that other actors can play in ending the conflict and establishing basic government institutions. Without question, the Transitional Federal Government remains weak and highly dependent upon the African Union mission to Somalia, AMISOM, for its security and also its survival. Its mandate expires in August, and its members will need to find a creditable way to build legitimacy moving ahead. For the other part of our dual-track strategy, we are looking to continue our support for AMISOM and increase our engagement and support for Somaliland, Puntland, and local administrative entities and civil society groups in south-central Somalia, such as the current administration in Galmudug. Secretary Clinton's visit to Goma in the eastern DRC in August of 2009 underscored the importance we attach to seeing an end to the violence in the eastern DRC. We are planning to reinvigorate our diplomatic efforts in the coming months to include the presentation of a revised strategy. We have heard the numerous calls for the appointment of a roving special envoy, but we believe for the time being, for a variety of reasons, that our ambassadors and their embassy teams in Kinshasa, Kampala, Kigali, and Bujumbura are in a strong position to work on the key and essential issues that must be tackled if we are to see peace in the eastern Congo and progress and peace throughout the Great Lakes. The UN peacekeeping operation MONUSCO also has a vital role to play in the DRC, and we will explore ways to improve its capacity and to strengthen its mandate. Security sector reform is vital for building the professionalism of the DRC military and weeding out those responsible for past atrocities. Recent U.S. legislation on conflict minerals, the Dodd-Frank legislation, provides us with still another tool to improve the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In the course of my nearly 40-year career, I have seen many situations across Africa considered intractable, unresolvable, that have come to resolution to the surprise of many pessimists. For this reason, I have learned to be patient and persistent and to use the tools that we have at our disposal. Despite the lack of progress in places like Zimbabwe, Madagascar, and Eritrea, we will not slacken in our efforts. You don't, and I think this is an appropriate analogy based on last night's events, you don't win a basketball game with a single jump shot or a single dunk. Those baskets only make a difference if you kept your score up with mostly persistent, hard work and play, some of it defensive and some of it offensive. That's what diplomacy is all about. The Obama administration is committed to recognizing Africa's strategic importance and drawing more attention to Africa's enormous promise and potential. This is especially important in the economic arena, where there is growing awareness of Africa's potential as a high-growth market and an important investment destination. We remain committed to a strong and revitalized AGOA and look forward to participating in this year's AGOA Forum in June in Lusaka, Zambia. But we all must do more in the business arena to remain competitive and to help Africa unleash its enormous economic and commercial potential. This is something for the United States government as well as the American business community. Together, we can make a difference in Africa's economic future and growth. I have only touched very briefly on a few of the priority issues and events that we anticipate during the coming months. My staff and I will also be working on a variety of what I would call normal diplomatic tasks of a trans-global nature, such as preparing for the next climate change conference to be held in Durban, South Africa, implementing programs to improve security and health, promoting a regional economic cooperation, becoming more attentive to the welfare of women and girls, engaging more with civil society and youth, and promoting the rights of disabled persons, but also engaging in other dialogues that are equally important to our African partners. Africa faces many challenges, but by working with Africa, we can, in effect, help that continent deal with those challenges in a way that is satisfying to its people and helpful to American and global interests as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Secretary Carson. What a comprehensive overview, and you bring us right up to date on so many things, from events this morning in Ivory Coast to the NCAA final results. Can't imagine a more comprehensive presentation than that.
Both were equally explosive and unpredictable.
As we said, we will now be open for about 45 minutes of questions and answers. Let me set the ground rules. Most of you have heard this many times before. We are being webcast live, so when I recognize you, wait for a microphone, and when it's delivered, then identify yourself and ask your question or pose your comment. Also, we do have an overflow room, so we have someone there who will be collecting the questions to be delivered to me, and we'll choose some of those questions to respond to as well. So with that said, let me hear from the floor. Okay, we have one right here. And I'm sorry, we'll take about 3 questions at a time, I think, to bundle them a bit and make it cover a little greater ground.
John Harbison, Johns Hopkins SAIS. Welcome, Ambassador Carson. I want to take you back to a country we both know well, Kenya, where they have been very successful in a constitutional, new constitution and new land reform. But it occurs to me that with roughly 100 mandates in those 2 documents, things that Parliament must do, many of them before the next election, not much has happened. Perhaps there's more information there, but what is our policy to try to help jumpstart those implementation questions?
Okay, question here.
My name is Joel Charney with Interaction, which is the alliance of American International Relief and Development NGOs. I want to raise what appears to be a contradiction in the Somalia policy. I mean, there's, according to the famine early warning system, there are significant food shortages in the offing this year for sure, and a potential famine if the rains fail. At this very moment, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance has imposed even tighter rules on the NGO partners of OFDA to the point where we've concluded that we're basically be unable to work inside Somalia under these new regulations. At the same time, you in the State Department are talking about a dual-track approach, working in Puntland and Somaliland where these new rules will apply, and even working in South Central, which we very much want to do, security permitting. And I'm wondering, I mean, it seems to me two arms of the government on Somalia are sort of working at cross purposes, and I wonder if you're aware of that, and if you wouldn't mind commenting on it. Thank you.
And one last question this round, right at the back standing. Okay, thank you very much. Johnny, you want to try?
Yeah, let me just say thank you very much. Good, all very good questions. To John, Professor, good to see you. John, your question about Kenya is very appropriate. There are, in fact, a number of legislative requirements to be filled before the new Kenyan constitution can become both operative and effective. Many, and I would say an overwhelming number of them have not been discussed or brought before Parliament. The failure to have these particular elements fully implemented will cripple the Constitution and will set back the political and democratic reform effort in Kenya. We're aware of this. We talk to Kenyan officials about it constantly in the field and here in Washington, D.C. We have seen any number of senior-level Kenyan officials. I traveled 3 weeks ago, 3.5 weeks ago, with Deputy Secretary of State Jim Steinberg to Kenya. We met with President Kibaki and with Raila Odinga. And some of those issues with respect to implementation of this pending legislation was on the docket. We expect that Raila Odinga will be here in Washington shortly, and it certainly will be a discussion point when we meet with him. It is absolutely imperative that greater progress be made on the implementation of these pieces of legislation in order to give a positive momentum to the constitutional changes that all Kenyans seek. And so, yes, recognize something that we are pushing constantly to have implemented. Joel, your comment on Somali and the Somali food crisis and U.S. policy. I see no contradiction between what we are doing, and maybe it's just the perspective that we have. Our policy in Somalia is a complex one because Somalia is a very complex place. Once just simply a failed state that was imploding upon itself, now has become a move from being just a local cancer to a regional cancer. Over 300,000 Somali refugees in Kenya alone, and with the Somali population in Eastleigh and Nairobi probably nearly as large as that of Mogadishu. We see enormous movement of illegal commerce and across the border, undermining the economic integrity of the neighboring states, and we see what is, in fact, a cancer that's become global: piracy, international terrorism, and other related issues. But at the heart of this, as it was 20 years ago, is the issue of food and a constant need to address famine-like conditions. Over the last year, there has been a continuing downward and negative trajectory on the food production side in Somalia. We're keenly aware of it, and we are looking, and I can assure you, actively at ways to begin to mitigate this problem. I'm not aware of the tougher OFDA rules and regulations, but one of the concerns, quite candidly, that we have had over the last 12 to 18 months has been the prospect of international food deliveries falling into the hands of al-Shabaab, the local Islamic extremist group that is operating throughout large parts of South Central. We hope that we can identify going forward mitigation strategies that will allow us to partner with groups like yourself, with WFP and with UNICEF and with Caritas World Vision, to be able to get food into critically needed zones in the South. This is a major concern. I see the charts from FuseNet showing increasingly fewer green areas, more orange, and a lot of very bright red. We're aware of this. We have been traditionally, up until last year, the largest contributor of food aid on a binational basis to Somalia. I hope that we will be able to respond during this period of crisis with, again, renewed food shipments. Commander, your question again is a good one about the need for substantial improvement in Africa's port infrastructure around the continent, possibly with the exception of South Africa and perhaps one or two other countries, Tanzania. Moving goods through ports is a very slow and inefficient operation, which increases the cost and slows down productivity. AGOA does not include a component for support to the rehabilitation and development of ports, although some African governments, and I point to governments like Angola, governments like Gabon, have started to invest quite substantial amounts of money in port facilities that will allow for greater access and shipment of goods and services. This has largely been done by those governments that have had resources to commit to these things, but it is something that needs to be done. The best that I can say is that MCC, the Millennial Challenge Corporation's accounts, do in fact provide infrastructure money as a component to some of their grants. And these too have been used extraordinarily well in some cases. I point to Cape Verde, which has used their MCC money to substantially upgrade their infrastructure, both air and port facilities on several of the islands. We hope that more countries that are MCC eligible will look at the MCC account as a way to address some of their strategic port concerns.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. I'm going to take two questions from the overflow room, and then I recognize one more from the floor here. I've already got the hand there on the side, right there by Alicia. The first question is, you compare Eritrea, author says rightfully so, that's his comment, not mine, to North Korea. What are some of the steps the U.S. is taking to engage with Asmara in order to encourage reform? And then regarding AGOA, does the State Department plan to reform AGOA to truly develop African small businesses rather than the current focus on oil exporting nations and et cetera?
Let me just take these very quickly, okay. Steve. And on Eritrea, when this administration came into office 2 years ago, Secretary Clinton gave me the mandate to try to improve our relationship with the Eritrean government. We sought diligently to do so. I initially tried to go out to Asmara to meet with President Isaias to see the foreign minister and other senior officials. In nearly 2 years in this job, just short of a few days, I have never received a visa to go. My deputy, Don Yamamoto, was able after over a year and a half of trying to go out to Eritrea. He finally managed to get a visa. He went out. He was unable to see anyone of any significance in the government. We had an ambassador in Eritrea, Ron McMullen, who spent 3 years in country, leaving last summer, and in that 3 years he was never able to present his credentials. Moreover, Secretary Clinton, trying early on, and this is now 16, 17 months ago, maybe as much as 18 months ago, after my unsuccessful efforts, sought herself to reach out to Isaias to say we would like to have a better relationship, and he refused to take her telephone call. This is an indication of what we have tried to do. We have now sent agreement for a new ambassador to Eritrea. That ambassador has not ever received agreement, has not gone out, and we have asked that the current ambassador who was here leave the country, and he is now departed. We think that we have done a great deal to establish a sound and more productive relationship with Eritrea. Eritrea is a spoiler in the region and has taken advantage of the situation in Somalia to undermine the situation there for the TFG and to use that as a way to carry out a proxy conflict with Ethiopia. That is not the way to end conflict. That's the way to fuel it. We look for opportunities. We will try to pursue them, and we have and will continue to do so. If Eritrea is willing to work with us, we are prepared to work with them, but we cannot, in fact, work if they are uninterested in talking. Let me just say what I said earlier in my comments with respect to AGOA. AGOA has been important to African countries and to a number of African businesses in expanding access to the American market and creating business opportunities on the ground for African countries and businesses. It is my desire and the desire of many in the administration to strengthen and revitalize AGOA, to move it forward, and to continue to make it a signature piece of our trade relationship with African countries.
Okay. All right, let's take 3 questions from here. Got one right here on the corner, and right in the middle there.
Howard Jeter. I'm a former State Department official and actually a very close colleague of Ambassador Carson. I'm delighted that you raised Nigeria, and I certainly agree with your assessment of the importance of Nigeria to the rest of Africa. It's not clear what happened that pushed the postponement of the first set of elections. Professor Jega briefed the president and briefed the Federal Executive Council just a few days before and said everything is fine. Everything's in place. Now, I wondered if you could explain to us what actually happened. And I really am happy that you have commended him for what he's done, because I think he's committed to not having an election like the one that we had in 2007, actually 2003 when I was there. There's speculation that there is a cabal within INEC about which Jega was not aware. And it was that cabal that was trying to promote the kind of election that Nigeria has had in the past. Is that true? And that they were trying to really push for Jega's resignation. But a pall sort of hangs over INEC right now. The second part of this is just an observation on Cote d'Ivoire. Ambassador Carson, I disagree with your assessment of the number of people killed so far in Cote d'Ivoire. I think the number is much, much higher. There are reports that in one village in southern Cote d'Ivoire, 1,000 people have been killed. And I saw photos of it. And as an old Liberia hand, I've seen a lot of atrocities. I've never seen anything like this. We have what appears to be a fixed framework for dealing with these kind of crises. Number one, was there ever a recognition that the stalemate would not be broken? Our bag of tricks is to finger the culprit, in this case Gbagbo. Secondly, to impose travel restrictions, asset freezes. If that doesn't work, we threaten the International Court of Justice. And then we have a UN resolution that's passed. Were there ever any other options considered? I remember back in the day, there was a head of state in Panama, a narco trafficker, heavily guarded. He was taken out. Was there ever any other option considered on Cote d'Ivoire?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right here in the middle.
I think I'm going to disappoint the crowd after Howard's exposition. I'm Tony Carroll with Manchester Trade, and thank you, Secretary Carson. I'd just like to question you a little bit more about Zimbabwe. Just about 2.5 weeks ago, in implementation of the indigenization laws, President Mugabe announced a program to, in effect, force foreign-owned mining companies to turn over their, or to force them to indigenize over 51% of their share ownership within 6 months. This includes some of the largest mining companies in the world, many of whom have been there for many years, employing many people. I'm wondering if these are not the acts of the final acts of a desperate and bankrupt administration, or will we continue to linger in this saga of the final act of President Robert Mugabe, and in fact continue to doom a country with, as you know, with some great promise to its continued laggard state economically and socially.
Thank you very much. It's right at the back there, the young lady in the back row.
Mariama Diallo, Voice of America. Get up, sorry. Quick thing, the gentleman who just spoke before, the last gentleman, I'm surprised that he mentioned Panama and Noriega, because on my way here with my cameraman, we were discussing in the car, and Noriega came back again as it relates to Ivory Coast, and I won't get there, but I'm glad that he was in more than one person's mind today. My question is still related to Ivory Coast and the crisis. As we talk, Gbagbo is in surrender talks right now, and I'm just curious to know that what's the next step for the United States to talk to us like about practical ways, like tangible ways that they are going to be involved when it comes to Ivory Coast. The other question has to do with, in the beginning of the crisis, Gbagbo was offered basically that a safe haven in the United States. I'm just wondering if that offer is still open. If today he decides, okay, I'm going to leave, can I go to the United States? Is it still open, or is it still a little too late? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And these are all very, very good good questions. Let me respond first to Ambassador Jeter's questions, and Howard is a very good friend, and in fact you have here two former and very excellent and outstanding ambassadors to Nigeria, and also a former special envoy to Nigeria in the form of Ambassador Jeter, Ambassador Robert Sanders, and Ambassador Don McHenry, who did a lot of good work in helping to bring about a democratic transition there. And I don't diminish at all the importance. Nigeria is extraordinarily important to Nigerians, to the West African sub-region, to the Africa as a whole, to the international community, to those who deal in oil, those who deal in peacekeeping. It's a major important Muslim state, so seventh largest Muslim state in the world, soon to will surpass Egypt in terms of its Muslim population probably within the next 3 or 4 years. This is a powerhouse, and we cannot ignore the importance of Nigeria. We do so at our own peril. This is a major power in Africa. But let me come to Ambassador Jeter's question about the elections. Some of this is opaque to us, to Howard. We saw Professor Jega's statements in the run-up to the elections expressing confidence and a greater degree of certainty than we saw on Saturday. It is our impression that there were indeed very serious logistical problems, and that probably as many as one third of the 36 36 states in Nigeria would not have been able to receive any election or balloting material this past April 2nd. And so when Professor Jega realized this, he decided, I think quite rightly, to pull back on the elections. I think in a subsequent audit of the process, he discovered there were probably a number of other systemic problems that had not been addressed. I think it is an issue that he has to deal with. I think it is a management issue and a logistical issue. I do not want to ascribe negative things to other commissioners. I do note that there are commissioners who were a part of the commission when Maurice Iwu, the former commissioner, was there. I hope that they are acting in accordance to the new direction of Professor Jega and not to the old negative ways of Maurice Iwu. It would be very unfortunate if there were election commissioners who helped to sabotage this process. Professor Jega is a man of great integrity. I have no reason whatsoever to doubt his desire to run a fair election process. He has been open and transparent with the international community. He has worked closely with IFES and some of the best election experts around the world, including probably the best election expert in Africa, Dr. Ofari John from Ghana. It is not Professor Jega who is at fault. I think there are more serious issues. We hope very much that this will be able to move forward, that the corrections will be made, and that the process is there. We do not want Nigeria's population to lose confidence in their elected leaders. We do not want them to lose confidence in the country's fledgling democratic institutions. We do not want Nigeria's democratic trajectory to go become static and bounce sideways or down. We want it to move forward. It's a commitment. Ivory Coast. Again, Ambassador Jeter asked a very important question. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight that rarely is seen around this town about what the options were. When the crisis in the Ivory Coast started to unfold in mid to late November and through December, the entire upper level of the administration was engaged. President Obama called President Gbagbo not once but twice. He reached out to him twice personally. He then sent one letter to President Gbagbo. That letter was followed up with another letter with quite some detail in it from Secretary of State Clinton, and the VOA correspondent makes passing reference to it. But let me tell you what that letter said. And this is before the crisis had started to morph into conflict. We said to President Gbagbo that he could come into the United States. After all, he has ties of a family nature here. He has at least 2 children who live in the United States. He has very strong friends in the United States. And so we did. And we reached out to a very prominent and prestigious university in the United States and asked whether it would be possible for him to become a distinguished fellow in residence, to be able to write, to lecture, to travel. This is all before the problem started to spiral out of control in January. So we did, in fact, take a proactive, engaged policy. But all of these overtures were rejected. I myself have engaged almost continuously on this issue, including in the last 24 hours talking to Prime Minister Soro, and in the last 3 days talking to Alison Ouattara directly. We have made all of these overtures and tried to find a diplomatic solution short of the effort that is being undertaken right now. As we saw the situation continuing to spiral downwards, as we saw the level of bloodshed and violence and human rights violations starting to spike, there was a clear need for action. And that action began yesterday at 1 o'clock Washington time when UNOSI and supported by UN, by French troops, began to eliminate the heavy artillery pieces of Gbagbo's regime. It was essential in order to end this cycle of bloodshed. The longer Gbagbo was in power, the more difficult it was going to be to remove him, and the more bloodshed and violence we expected. It was necessary. The international community acted as it should, and it acted because we were acting in accordance to UN Security Council resolutions and in accordance to the support that was strong and clear from ECOWAS from the very beginning. I think that if in fact President Gbagbo were allowed to continue along the path that he was going, it would have not only undermined the integrity of the ballot, it would have undermined the integrity of democracy, and it would been given encouragement to a large number of African leaders who would choose to hold elections, lose them, but remain in power through extra legal means. It was essential. This was a test case not only for the Ivory Coast, it was a test case for democracy in Africa. This is a sign. This is a signal. The ballot must be respected. Democratic aspirations that are desired by Africa's people must be heard, must be respected. And the international community will, in fact, act if the situation warrants. I think this is a good case. There is a way forward. Gbagbo is now holed up in a bunker in his house, which is completely surrounded now. We hope that he will see reason and will come out and give himself up. There have been numerous opportunities. What we in Washington did parallels what others did as well. Our efforts in terms of the early days in November and December, paralleled by the French, who also offered opportunities to come to France and to move away and out of the scene, and they were paralleled by a couple of other governments as well. So there was the offer. The offer is no longer on the table. The offer is no longer on the table because he has in fact participated in the violation, the serious violation of the human rights of many Ivorians. Last part of that question, I used the number 1,000, and again, Ambassador Jeter is probably quite correct. Numbers are modest, but I suspect that when we look at the situation in the West along the Liberian border, where we have not had access ourselves, the numbers could spiral quite substantially higher. No question. Not trying to diminish the importance of this, but our engagement and our level of diplomacy on this and other issues with respect to moving democracy forward, with respect to trying to resolve conflicts across the continent, has in fact been quite deep, quite engaged, not only in Sudan, in Guinea-Conakry, in Niger, in Madagascar. We have not been passive players at the table, and not even with countries like Eritrea.
Thank you. I will take another round of questions from our overflow room, and I will do some paraphrasing, maybe even refocusing here. So forgive me out there in the overflow room if I do any damage to your question. First one is from Joel Miller, who's with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and asks if there have been any particular areas of concern that you see in Africa related to forced migration, whether internal displacement or international refugees. The next question is from Umar Mota Ali, and he or she asks, how does the U.S. view growing Indian and Chinese interest in African energy resources and African investment by Asian countries? The last one I think is interesting, and this is a real paraphrase, but in terms of the situation in Libya, has the United States and its allies, NATO and otherwise, been working with the Africa Union in addressing that question?
Let me thanks. I'm going to start by going back to Tony Carroll's question on Zimbabwe, which I did not did not answer. Let me just say, we've seen the new indigenization law. It is quite disturbing to see this law being brought in. It only undermines the confidence of the international business community in doing business in Zimbabwe, which could, under different circumstances, be an African powerhouse. But let me say, is it the indications of a dying regime? We have been very disappointed in the slow implementation of the global political agreement that was signed some 18 months ago between Robert Mugabe and Morgan Tsvangirai of the MDC. We hoped that this agreement would lead to consultations, a new constitution, new elections, internationally observed broadly, and probably a new political dispensation. Regrettably, this has not happened. Friction between the MDC and Robert Mugabe's government has continued to take place. Robert Mugabe recently celebrated his 87th birthday and appears to be as hale and hearty and as healthy as most of us in this room. He, though, has around him within ZANU-PF a number of people who aspire to replace him, and their aspirations to be the next president of Zimbabwe are just as great as those of Morgan Tsvangirai or Tendai Biti, his very, very good finance minister. What we have to do is to work to ensure that whenever Zimbabwe holds its next elections, that they are under international observation, and not just from SADC, but from the Commonwealth, from the Carter Center, from the German Stiftungs, from the European Union, from the UK, and from various other international organizations. That is one way to help ensure that there will be light and transparency on the process, and a process that shouldn't begin on Election Day, but should begin several months in advance. But we continue to focus very heavily on Zimbabwe, and that allows an easy segue into the first of Steve's questions on migration. Migration is a tough issue, and it's a tough issue for Africans to deal with. Some African countries can deal with it effectively and absorb it with some or minor consequences, others cannot. One of the problems that Zimbabwe has caused to the region, not only in terms of image, but to the huge migration of Zimbabweans across the border into South Africa. South Africa has been extraordinarily hospitable in terms of absorbing millions of Zimbabweans. Probably as much as 20% of the population has gone across the border to South Africa, and a smaller number into Botswana. Without any UNHCR camps, they've taken on people and absorbed them into the economy. But it has created a backlash, and that backlash we've seen over the last 3 years in a rise in xenophobia in South Africa. Other migrations have led to other kinds of problems. I mentioned Kenya and the Dadaab refugee camp, set up a decade ago to handle 40,000 people. Now over 300,000 people in Dadaab. This is having an enormous negative impact on the economy of a country like Kenya. And then there are other problems of migration, and you can see those in a place like Libya, where I think, in fact, hundreds of thousands of Africans have gone to Libya essentially as guest workers and now have been caught up in a conflict, many of them accused of being mercenaries and who've lived there for 20 or 30 years as workers. There are different forms that migration migration patterns can take across Africa. In most instances, they're negative, except when there are places like South Africa which can absorb them better. India and China are legitimate economic competitors to the United States. They are, in effect, looking at the same economic landscape that we are looking at, and where they are the shoe salesman and see people who need shoes, we are the shoe salesman and see people who are without shoes and say no shoes are required. They are taking full advantage of what is in fact an exploding market and opportunity out there. They are being aggressive. China is being economically aggressive in its efforts to secure oil and mineral and gas rights, and using its money to leverage its influence. And to a certain extent, India is also looking for opportunities on the continent as well, looking for markets for its growing industrial base. What we have to do is not to rail at the sun, but take advantage ourselves of the opportunities that are out there and be just as aggressive and entrepreneurial in Africa as we've been in China, in Latin America, and in Europe and in our own country. We have to do more. We have to be patient, persistent, methodical. We have to build up networks, and we have to engage. If we, in effect, do not, then we cannot, in effect, condemn others for going into the market. There are some downsides to China's activities in Africa. Unlike India, unlike Brazil, unlike a number of other countries that have been traditional partners and competitors, France and Germany and the UK, we're all democracies. We're all democracies, including India. We have standards that we accept that are baseline for our operations. The Chinese don't. The Chinese don't have those same economic law-based norms that we do. They bring a model which could be called authoritarian capitalism, free market enterprise with a non-democratic face. The United States, France, Britain, India, Germany, Sweden bring a market-based economy with a set of rules and laws that allow for transparency not only in politics but transparency and accountability and legal-based norms in business. China doesn't bring that. China doesn't bring that. That's the difference. Yes, market-based, but the norms and basis on which they're, I think Africans must hold China and others equally accountable. There is a difference between what we do. When an American business or a British or an Italian or a French or a Swedish business goes into Africa, as much as it is criticized, it does bring some things that are quite different. It brings technology. It brings skills-based transfers. It allows people to move up into positions of higher management. It employs most of its people locally. It trains. It brings them into a larger part of a global network. It says that even if you're a Nigerian hired by Shell, you're going to get that same engineering training, that same business training, and you may, in fact, end up in the office. If you're an Angolan oil company, you may end up in the office in Paris or London or New York. You're going to get that same training. Technical skills, transfer, training, involvement in a corporate and vertically integrated operation. That's not happening with China. I hope Africa will see that there is a difference. We don't have, in the few large American companies there, we don't have Americans in gym shoes and white T-shirts carrying cement up the third floor of a building, and with and in buckets. You see that in some of the other kinds of operations. You know, if there's an unemployment problem and a need for skills in business, you know, let those bring the investment in, but hire locally, train locally, transfer skills locally, build that country up, and make it a sound partner in the process. But again, these are things that you see. It's not just for me to observe. You have to observe them, and also African countries have to recognize them and observe them as well. Again, don't see India and China as anything other than economic competition, much more assertive and aggressive economic competition. We can't just bark at the sun and the moon. We have to, in effect, go out and compete against them. As the
Africa Union and Libya.
Libya. Let me just say, with respect to Africa Union and in Libya, and I say this: Libya is not a part of the Africa Bureau. The Maghreb states and Egypt are a part of the Middle East Bureau and the State Department, but we have in the Africa Bureau been seized with elements of this problem as well. Many states, including those in the north in Maghreb, including Libya, have in fact been members of the African Union. They've also been members of the Arab League. They've also been members of the OIC. One of the things that has been surprising as an institution, and the Africa Union has done some very good things over the last decade, is the difference in the way the Africa Union has reacted to the Libyan crisis and the way the Arab League has reacted to the African crisis. When several months ago, I shouldn't say now, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, the head of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, was very quick to condemn the violence that was being perpetrated by Libyan soldiers against their population. Use of tanks, use of helicopter gunships, use of armored personnel carriers against people on the street. Amr Moussa said this is unacceptable. He condemned it. And shortly afterwards, the Arab League expelled Libya from its ranks. To this day, other than the statements of Chairperson John Ping, the head of the Africa Union, and his deputy, Mr. Lamamra, and the statements they've made, the African Union has not, as an organization, condemned Gaddafi and the use of helicopter gunships and heavy equipment against their citizens, and they have not moved to expel. What they've done is sought to investigate, wanting to go to Libya to see what was happening on the ground. I think that it is something to observe. I throw out the comparisons, and I stop right there. But again, these comparisons are to be seen, they are to be recognized, and the responses are there for people to witness.
Thank you. Well, we're actually about over our time, but I didn't warn you, so I'm going to take 2 more questions. Look at the hands. And I'll have to make some decisions. Right in the middle here, we go for a centrist.
You've got Whitney over there too, but you can.
Whitney and the woman in the middle there. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Steve. Whitney Schneidman Associates. Johnny, let me attempt to respond to the invitation of President Harman to ask you a hard question, so I don't have to impose on our friendship. But I do want to come back to AGOA and really drill down on the notion of revitalizing AGOA, because, to be honest, I see the trend line going in the different direction. As you know, for the last 10 years, there's been a presidential trade capacity building initiative toward Africa. Clinton administration had ATRIP and the Trade for Africa Development Enterprise. In 2006, the Bush administration committed $200 million to the African Global Competitive Initiative, and this expired in September 2010, and there's no follow-on from the Obama administration. At the same time, we're getting indications that Commerce Department is going to close foreign commercial offices in Dakar and Accra. And when Ambassador Kirk gave his address to Congress on his trade agenda for 2011, not only did he not mention AGOA, he didn't mention Africa. And as you know, the third country fabric aspect of AGOA will expire next year, and there's a whole question of, do we extend AGOA in 2015 or not? And at the same time, the EU has been very effective in negotiating economic partnership agreements in Africa, and Chinese trade is set to expand to $300 billion by 2015. So from where I sit, to be honest, it looks like we're missing the opportunity, and we're being closed out of the market. And I just wanted to get your reaction to that.
Okay. And then right in the middle here, this lady. Mm-hmm. And then I'm overruled because of protocol. Ambassador Mitufu gets the last question.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Carson. My name is Allison Johnson, and I would like to actually piggyback on Whitney's comment because it's very much along the lines of my question. Because as you know, you've been very supportive of the Corporate Council on Africa and the attempt to really push American business to invest more in Africa. So this question really has to do about the implementation of a smart power in U.S. foreign policy as it concerns trade, investment, and commerce. To what extent do you believe, through your leadership and the interagency process, will there be a commitment with the Export-Import Bank, OPIC, USTDA, and USTR to push through the National Export Initiative at the Commerce Department a real, committed U.S. government program to help U.S. business invest and trade more in Africa? The African Union has put forward millions and billions of dollars of programs to invest in Africa. Is there a way, through your leadership and through the missions on the ground in every embassy, through the ambassadors, to really push an agenda where, like you said, to compete with China, to compete with India, we have a program? It is through a U.S. government-wide smart initiative to invest our U.S. companies, our U.S. businesses in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ambassador.
Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to comment on Ambassador Carson on the issue, the remaining concern that he expressed about the DRC. Mainly the rule of law and the issue of human rights. And specifically, I will focus on the issue of gender-based violence because it's been a pillar of the U.S. administration. And I think at this point in time, I don't share the pessimism that was expressed, but rather optimism. Because of the collaborative efforts that we've seen recently between the Congolese government, between the judicial system, between the UN, and also with the United States, actually, that led to the most recent arrests and continue to do so. And also the involvement of the US, which has a representative who is working closely with not only the UN but with the FARDC to really promote civilian and soldiers relations, and it's working. We also have a zero tolerance policy in terms of combating corruption, which also has led to recently quite a few arrests of even members of the government and others. And my question, I have a question, I just wanted to start with that comment. The question is, in light of the current budget debate in Congress, and we know the position of the majority in Congress, how optimistic are you in terms of seeing these programs, especially for post-conflict countries, seeing these programs continue, how can the U.S. continue to strengthen all these efforts if the administration doesn't succeed in making its case in Congress? And also, again, with a Republican-led Congress, we know their position towards a multilateral organization because you talked about the support towards MONUSCO. How optimistic are you to really get what is needed to support MONUSCO's efforts? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Save the last three questions for the toughest. Let me respond first to the first two questioners. I think Whitney and Allison, I think your name, asked two of the two similar questions. As I said in my remarks and earlier, I think that AGOA has been very successful and very important. And it is the desire of the Department of State to see AGOA both fully utilized, revitalized, and I use that word revitalized to take into account one of the issues that you mentioned, Whitney, and renewed. We are very much aware that next year, 2012, the third-party multi-fiber agreement runs out. Many of the more successful African beneficiaries of AGOA have, in fact, taken advantage of this use to manufacture apparel for the U.S. market. It is important, I think, that we not allow AGOA to slip backwards. It is unfortunate, and it's why the use of the word revitalize, that the Trade Capacity Initiative, which has been a part of AGOA, was not, in fact, renewed last year. I am hopeful. I am hopeful that we will see a renewal of this. I cannot guarantee it because the money for this is generally come from another U.S. government agency. But I think if others around town who have an interest in this are as diligent as we are in trying to ensure that it will continue to be revitalized and renewed, then I hope we will continue to make some progress. But again, it is our commitment in the Department of State to see it continue, revitalized, renewed, third country fabric extended next year, and certainly an extension in 2015 to a longer period of time to give businesses an opportunity to know that if they sink capital costs in, that they will have an opportunity to develop, recover their resources and engage in trade and commerce. Again, I won't comment on anything outside of my purview. You raised issues related to the Department of Commerce and the loss of potentially positions, attaché, commercial attaché positions. I can assure you from my vantage point that we don't have an overabundance. We have a insufficient number. I want to see more attachés, not less. And the loss of attachés is a loss for us as well as the countries involved. We're committed to trying to see more and not less. With respect to testimony by others, I'll have to let you direct those comments to the folks at USTR on what they have in their statements. But we are, very much committed. We are committed to saying this is, we must have a positive economic and commercial agenda. We can help inside of government through things like AGOA, but we also have to have in place things that will support American businesses overseas, whether it is Exim Bank, whether it's OPIC, whether it is the foreign commercial attaches. But in the end, American business also has to not stand back. They must engage, must look for the opportunities, and must go forward and simply not criticize India and China when they make investments, but themselves go out and seek the opportunities to do so as well. We know our part. We will be supportive of others so they can do theirs. Ambassador Retifu, you raise a number of interesting questions and issues. It is our strong desire to have a strong, positive, and mutually beneficial relationship with the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We have put in place some very able diplomats in Kinshasa. I myself very much sees this as an important place. We want to help the Congo to strengthen its democratic institutions, open up economic opportunities for all of its citizens in the violence in the eastern part of the Congo, and do those things which are not just important for the United States, but most important for the people of the Congo. We are pleased with our relationship with President Kabila. He has indeed done a number of things that many people thought he would never do. We recognize that, but just as we here in Washington and the United States do not accept where we are as a static plateau, we also recognize that others must continue to walk and ascend to greater places as well. When we stop moving in this global community, we slide backwards. So it is important for all of us, including us in Washington, to continue to move ahead. We encourage the Congo to do that. We say that we will be a friend and a partner as the Congo does it. All of the interests that you have are interests that we share, that we want to share with you. So I don't look at it as a negative. I think that we want to build the relationship and make it significantly stronger. Your strength in the Congo enhances the strength of your neighbors, enhances the strength of the global community. With respect to U.S. aid programs, we are watching the budget as closely as you diplomats and others in the audience are. We hope that it will not be negatively impacted. U.S. foreign assistance constitutes just a little bit around of 1% of our overall U.S. budget. We hope that the Congress, both the House and the Senate, recognize the importance of U.S. foreign assistance in advancing both peace and stability, democracy and development, and our common global agenda, and that it will not, in fact, be significantly impacted. We're committed to working with the UN. I think Ambassador Rice has made that quite clear in her testimony. We believe the UN is an important and fundamental global organization whose importance continues to grow and does not diminish. We want to be supportive of the long-term objectives of the organization, and I hope people will continue to see its merit and its value. and I'll stop right there and go back to work.
Thank you very much. May I ask your indulgence, please? Thank you for that warm congratulations to Johnny and his gracious allocation of time to us. But if you wait just a moment, we're going to ask Johnny to stay for a second and ask Darius, Robin, and Mel, and Stanley to come up for a photo here with our co-sponsors. And then as Johnny tries to get out of the room, you can grab at him all you want.
No,